I'm gonna start recording. All right, hello everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. I would just like to welcome you all to our January webinar for mentors within the Liberal Arts Alumni Mentor Program. We are incredibly lucky to have Cassie Rosas Carson here, who is the Internship and Professional Development Coordinator for the College of Information Sciences and Technology, Career Solution and Corporate Engagement Office today. So she is going to be talking about technology trends in the job search. And this is a topic that is pretty ever present in our society today. I know it comes up a lot when I'm working with our liberal arts students during career coaching. So hopefully this will be helpful for all of you as you're mentoring your students. As a quick reminder, this meeting will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel for later viewing. And I will be monitoring the chat with questions and encourage you to ask any questions that you have. We have our expert in front of us here today, so definitely take advantage. So with that, I will hand it over to Cassie.
Hello, everybody. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to be back in the world of liberal arts. I previously was lucky enough to work with them at my last position, and I'm excited to be here to really talk about applicant tracking systems. You know, this is really taking over the world of recruiting in many ways. And so I'm hoping that the information that you learned today is not only helpful when you're talking with your mentees and having these conversations, because it can be a barrier to internships and employment if they don't know those tips and tricks of what's going on, but also for you as you might be entering the job force again at some point throughout your career. And many things have probably changed since the last time you were out there. And we are seeing a lot of professionals going in different directions post-pandemic, and we really saw a huge increase in applicant tracking systems due to the pandemic. So a lot of good content. Please send questions any point in time. I'm fine with being interrupted. I'm very informal with my presentations, as Lauren can tell and has seen in the past. I want to make sure this information is helpful to you. I don't know everything, but this is definitely something that I've been learning a lot more this last year, and attending as many workshops and things that I can, because I think it's so important to make sure that everybody has this information so they're not losing great opportunities, but also employers are losing great candidates. So it's really equal across the board. So I want to talk a little bit first about, why we're learning about this and why it's so important is actually 97% of applicants are going through an application tracking system, or ATS. That is a huge number. We've seen such a large increase in companies utilizing these systems because there are so many candidates. And one big thing is that it's technology. So they're really good at catching mistakes. So we have to be even more picky and really detail oriented when we're working with students, when we're looking at our own resume and materials, because technology is a lot better at that sometimes than us. And there's a lot of good resources that you can utilize out there to kind of even check yourself, like JobScan, that are free resources. I think you get like 5 job scans a year. There's other things popping up like Quincina and other ones. So I encourage you and students and telling your students to utilize some of these technologies, because we don't catch everything as humans, but those AI, artificial intelligence can, and so we want to make sure that they're having a well-received resume, not only by technology, but by humans as well, as eventually it will go to a human. Most postings, and if this is good information to pass on to students, because sometimes, unfortunately, I think, well, I applied to like 10 internships, that's enough, right? No, not enough. It's competitive, as you can see. One posting can get up to 250 applications. That is a lot of candidates to go through, which is why companies are using ATS systems, is to really filter through that quickly so they can move and really work with qualified candidates through the interviewing and other hiring processes. And even larger companies, popular companies like Microsoft and Google, they're getting 50,000 plus applications. So no human has the time to go through all of that and really identify. We have to move quickly as anybody who's been an applicant waiting after you submit is frustrating. So you do want them to get through those applications quickly, and applicant tracking systems definitely helps with that. But also too, with some of these big numbers, that's what makes Nittany Lion Careers and other Penn State resources so important, is it can cut down that competition and number of applicants, and making sure your mentees know that information and are utilizing those resources in addition to those larger job boards as well. So applicant tracking systems can do a lot of different stuff, and I think it's important to know what stages of the recruiting process it can be involved in. And it really depends on how the company is utilizing it, but also to what system they're utilizing, as some of them will do some things, other things, all the things. It's really up to their process. So the most common things that they do is they're that first screen of resumes. They're looking for at least a 51% match, closer to 60, but anywhere 51 is the best that you're going to go. That's going to really increase that, hopefully, screening interview. They can do that communication, application received, you're not a candidate, those automated kind of messages. They even can do the initial background check, depending on what the position is. And as we're seeing a lot more with different positions, they can do some assessments like personality assessments or other assessments the employer might be including in their job process that they have found has really helped them to better identify candidates that are a better fit for their company and culture. And then ultimately doing that screening interview. So today we'll be focusing mostly on the resume and screening interview part of the technology process. So formatting for ATS systems with resumes, there's a couple of things that I see these errors with resumes very frequently. So something to look out for on your own, but also when you're working with students. The big thing is a lot of our students, because we have so many academic colleges, like to include the academic college with the university name, but often do the under the university name and the not example. And when you do that, an applicant tracking system doesn't realize that the college is within the university, as there are, colleges like Boston College that are its own entity. So having it separated by a comma on the same line shows that it's within the same institution and can help with that error out, because it is looking for another degree associated with that college. So it doesn't really get that. So the more cleanly we can make that information, the better it kind of filter through and organize the information on the application. Also too, when listing the degree, really making sure it's not just BS, but it's B period, S period going into it. Or if they want to spell it out, Bachelor's of Science, and having some kind of break, comma, for example, or a period to show between the bachelor's and information sciences. I have a ton of students that tend to use major instead of, and if they don't have that BS or Bachelor's of Science or Bachelor's of Arts in that example, then that is a very quick way for them to be eliminated from that potential opportunity, because one of the biggest qualifications is attending a 4-year program. So those are some things to definitely make sure that you're looking out for. If they have 2 degrees, as you can see towards the bottom, then they can list those separately. If maybe one's Bachelor's of Arts or one's Bachelor's of Science, if they're both Bachelor's of Science, they could be listed together. And the other big thing that I see a lot and is really important with applicant tracking systems is a lot of students like to put just leadership as a section header or student involvement without adding that word experience. And if we're missing that key word, then applicant tracking systems don't realize that it's experience, and it's not adding it to that overall evaluation of the information. So we really want to make sure we're encouraging students to add that word experience in any of the sections that they have. They can have typically up to 3 different experience sections. They can organize it however it relates to what they're looking for at that point in time, but just really encouraging them to add that word so that they're getting ranked as high as possible for a match for that position. So some great tips for doing, getting past these ATS systems is when they're creating their bullets and you have your bullets, that you're really starting with the action verbs, but really utilizing skills and tasks into results, because employers want to see results in any position. And so they're really looking for this result focused content within the experiences. So not only just, they don't really want to see like students working in a team of 5, but, you know, working with a team to raise $10,000 for Thon could be a better articulation of quantifying information, but also giving information about the results of the work that they did in that organization or that role. Something else is to always send as a PDF, but save the PDF regularly. When they're going to make edits on a document, their resume, they always want to go to the original format. So whether it's Word or Google Doc, and then resaving it as a PDF. And saving the PDF monthly and regularly helps to keep the document from being corrupt. And a really great way of checking this is copying and pasting the PDF. So not opening within Word, but once it's open in PDF, copy the content and then paste it into Word. If it's not formatted like the resume, that's showing corruption of the file and that it needs to be resaved in a PDF. So a great kind of tip to pass on. Also being consistent with font and font sizes. Sometimes students want to get a little crazy with some colors and different things like that, which is fine when you're doing in-person events, but really want to stay pretty classic and simple when doing a online submission to an application. So making sure they're keeping with some of those most standard fonts that you see on the screen and really only utilizing, you know, 2 to 3 different font sizes. Anything more than that can really kind of mess up with the ATS system. As I mentioned, using experience in every header, this one is just so important because we really don't want them to not get credit basically for the experience that they have engaged in. And some things that can really mess up an ATS system and error out a resume is the use of tables used more than just in the skill section. That's completely fine. Text boxes, photos, templates. I have students that ask me about templates all the time. ATS systems do not like templates whatsoever because there's a lot of formatting and text boxes and stuff in it that it has a hard time to read through the content. So that's why it's not a good thing to add into it. And then any graphics as well, because it doesn't know how to understand graphics, read graphics, and those are when you're getting those errors, and that could potentially rule out a candidate. So just the big standout things to really take notice is having those accomplishments and results in those bullets are so important. And sometimes it's talking through with students and being like, well, what was the result of the work that you were doing? What did you accomplish in this role? It doesn't have to be official, you know, award or something like that, but just you were doing something and there had to be a result at some point. Did you make something more efficient? Were you able to create a new way of doing something? So sometimes having those conversations that gets the student thinking, then like, oh, I do have some things I could add to that. Skills is really important in the skill section. You're focusing on those hard skills and things like that, but it's also important to add those skills within experiences, whether it's a class project, student organization, making sure they're using and highlighting those skills in action and experience and in their skill section is also a really great way to kind of rank their resume and match the position higher, especially if it's a desired skill or qualification in the position they're applying to. And the other thing that's really interesting is that, you know, prior to ATSs, you know, we were always kind of like objectives, kind of like a filler, or if you're in an in-person event, you know, and they're looking for interns in, you know, full-time positions, it can be really helpful for them to know what you're looking for. But it actually can be really helpful with the applicant tracking system as it gives the student an opportunity to highlight their skills again on the resume that can really help score them higher, but also too, if they're kind of open to different positions, they're really, you know, interested in a company, but they're really not specific on a position. If they don't include an objective, one will actually be generated for them through the ATS system. So if that's the case, you know, have them keep it off. But if there is something very specific that they're looking for, having that objective and highlighting those skills again in that section can be really beneficial for those students to stand out. So some great stats that I think is really important for everybody to know in the process of the approaching applicant tracking systems is that actually adding a LinkedIn URL to the contact information section can actually increase a candidate's chance of hearing back from a company, which is really great. Companies really want to see that professional online presence. However, if it's not a strong LinkedIn profile, it's not going to help them move to that interview process. So they want to have that URL, but they really need to have that strong. So making sure all that information's on their LinkedIn, adding to it, because one page you kind of limited on space, and really encourage them to put everything on LinkedIn. So those classes, those skills, those projects, those volunteer experiences, and that will help overall the likelihood of moving forward in the process. Also too, just some things to keep in mind. Like I said, they're kind of looking for that 60% matching, but 51 and above really increases their chances for that interview. And I think this is really important information to share with students, because a lot of times I know when I work with my students here, they think that they have to have 100% match. And that's really not the case, as many companies are just kind of putting their wish list of things that they are hoping to maybe get from a candidate. But they really will make those decisions more based on personality, qualifications, other things. And some of those holes that a candidate might have, often they can teach them, but they really focus on a lot of those soft skills and things like that. So having that reminder can really encourage students to maybe apply to positions that they didn't think that they were qualified for. This is something that's interesting, but people are not really sure why this is, but for resumes that have a word count of 400 to 75 to 600, has double the chance of getting an interview. So I think it's just one of those weird tweaks with like the coding and the programming of it that happens. So that's something that students can easily scan and check and reduce some of the content to help with that as well. So there's a lot of really great ways that people can be successful with these applicant tracking systems. Tailored resume, as we know, is really, really important, but through an ATS system, it can also double their chances of getting an interview as well. Average application time is 4 weeks. I get a lot of students that are like, I applied a week ago and I haven't heard anything. So good reminders of it does take some time for them to go through applicants, move people forward, and even just to accept applications. So good things to kind of share with students. And then utilizing Nittany Lion Careers, but also utilizing other job boards is important. I usually always recommend students look at about 3 to 5 resources as they're going through. So now we're going to kind of move into we got the application through the applicant tracking system. The next step typically in the hiring process is going to be the AI interviewing, that screening interview. So if students ever said, I got this email with a link to record my answers and it gets sent back, it's those type of interviews. This is becoming a real big can be a barrier for students going through the process. And we've seen a 2,500% increase in these type of screening interviews since the pandemic. So a lot more companies, started with the resume, ATS tracking system, but have really added a lot of the interview AI components in the last 2 years. So this is something that we really want to work with our students on practicing. And there's some really good resources for this as well. So the virtual screening, this is to try to help reduce bias within the applicant or application recruiting process. It saves money and it saves time for companies and recruiters to kind of get through this. They're looking for a couple different things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And it's really become a large industry as a lot of companies have started developing either screening software for this, or they have been utilizing softwares to help students practice these different type of things. So it has been a very billion-dollar industry that has been created in the last 2 years. As I said, these are commonly emailed to the students from the system. with directions, really making sure that they're reading those directions ahead of time, making sure they're not clicking on those links until they're ready to record the interview. Many times they are not able to click the link more than once. So that's really, really important. Sometimes they get more than one try. It's dependent on the system that should be communicated within the email, but the employer is notified if the student records their answer more than once. Once that's kind of completed, then it will send back a report to the recruiters on the candidates, and it evaluates things like, rate of speech and filler words, eye contact, body movement, many things that, any HR professional is going to be looking for those things as well, but obviously it's at a next level with the AI tracking. So these are just some common AI softwares that are out there that kind of utilize different things. Like some have the personality traits that they look at. Some are focusing on the audio, video, and content, and used for popular companies like EY. The last one is actually partnered with LinkedIn, which is really awesome because it's a free resource that you can use, your students can use. When they're on LinkedIn, if they go into the job posting section, on the left-hand side, there's the interview, and they can actually practice with this system, see how an AI is grading them, evaluating them. There's lots of questions they can pick through. So this is a really great resource for students to get used to this type of interviewing that is definitely different than just a live virtual interview. So they want to make sure all those different things, good practicing throughout. So definitely check that out. Encourage your students to check that out, and even work with them on it and giving them feedback as well. Because as I said before, the applicant tracking system is going to be the first one at the resume and the interview, but eventually it is going to move on to that human recruiter. So some things to keep in mind with AI is that the lighting is really important, as the algorithms are looking at those micro expressions. So whether someone is smiling, where their eyes are moving. So students can look directly at the camera, they can look at the screen. It still is going to give them that good score of eye contact, but they don't really want to be looking other places, which can be, a real challenge. And so having that lighting is going to give them a more accurate evaluation of all those little things that the system is looking for. Having a clear background is really important. I think we're getting used to having options like virtual backgrounds like I have today. But a lot of these systems don't have that option like Zoom or Teams does. So they need to make sure and think about that ahead of time, because the algorithms, if there's a lot of stuff in the background, can have a hard time focusing on the face, and that can affect their overall evaluation. So having the most plain background they can is really, really important. As I said, the eye contact, looking at it, as many people or students are used to having things on their lap, things like that, they really want to make sure that that is eye level, so they have that eye contact and they have that leveled camera view that also affects with that algorithm. So not having the angle, but that straight kind of view. Making sure that they are speaking clearly. So they're hearing all the words that they're saying, as we can tend to mumble or speak fast when we get really nervous. But if they're not catching everything that's going to be said, that's definitely going to affect their evaluation, as well as they are looking for keywords that relate to the position that they are hiring for. They want to see and hear them in examples, and they're going to get scored on that content overall. So they're looking for those visual cues, the audio cues, and overall content as it relates to the position. So using those keywords, having them practice and prepare for an interview just like any other interview. So reviewing that job posting, making sure they're using some of those keywords within some of their behavioral questions or the tell me about their self question, as those are pretty common throughout some of these screening questions. So before we get into the Q&A, as we are talking about applicant tracking systems today as they're not perfect. We know that, the industry knows that. They are continuously working on these platforms to help reduce bias. It is not 100%, as people that are creating these systems can add bias into the coding, unfortunately, and we see that across other ATS tracking AI type platforms. So it is something to, take with a grain of salt, but it is become such a prevalent part of the hiring process that it is something that we need to know about and think about these different things that I talked about today to help get through that. And also too, recruiters do know that not all applicant tracking systems hit every qualified candidate. Unfortunately, it's not a perfect system, that it does sometimes miss good candidates, which is why it's so important for students to not just apply online as part of their process for finding internships or full-time jobs, that they need to be attending career fairs on campus. They need to be attending networking events on campus. They need to be utilizing virtual networking like LinkedIn, messaging, alumni, recruiters, emailing companies. So all those different components. So they have good conversation. If the recruiter likes what they're hearing or seeing, they're going to go and look at that application regardless of what their evaluation or scoring was through the applicant tracking systems. And a human recruiter can bypass that. So those things are really important, as well as that combination of the knowledge, the networking, those other things are going to help those students to be successful in their internship and job search. So just something that I do want to throw in there. And the last thing is that I know students, when I talk about using some of the basic resumes, they, are like, oh, I made this such a beautiful, pretty resume and I want to use it. They still can. A lot of companies, when they're applying online, do give them an option to add additional documents, and they could add that really beautiful colored, template resume that they did in Canva or Publisher, other different ones I've seen. And when they are starting their interviews and they put packets together, that nice resume will be part of the packet, so they can see it once they get that human component added to it. But also too, for in-person events, or adding it to a LinkedIn is great too. So they can still use that beautiful one, but really having that more basic black and white non-template resume is going to help them be more successful in the online application. So now I'll open it up to any questions that anybody has, or anything that you would like me to expand on from some of the things that I talked about today. I know sometimes it can be a lot of information at once. If you want to submit any questions in the chat, or if you want to, I'm not sure if people are able to unmute and ask live, that's fine too.
I think people should be able to unmute. So feel free to unmute and ask any questions that you might have, or pop it in the chat like Cassie said. I do also want to offer our services as well. So the Career Enrichment Network, we're here to help students navigate these types of things. So if I know that the first time that I learned about applicant tracking systems, I was very overwhelmed, and I was like, oh my gosh, am I doing the right thing? Have I been giving students the right information? And the answer wound up being yes, but it still is a lot of information, as we're seeing such a shift in technology with how resumes, cover letters, and applications are being evaluated. So please know that if as Cassie was going through this, if you have any questions that you can't think of right now, you can always send your students over to the Career Enrichment Network, and we can talk with them one-on-one through a career coaching appointment. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question. It's actually for me. So I am transitioning from a live entertainment field to a film television field. So I'm in the same industry, but I'm transitioning fields, and I cannot for the life of me get past these screening systems. Even though I have the skills, I have the experience, I am going to go back and redo my resume, but any advice? Because I'm not at the intern level anymore. It's been a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't seem to hit those targeted words that they're looking for that get me past that screener.
Yeah. So, and that's a common problem. And as Lauren mentioned, kind of being overwhelmed when it first happened. And I felt, very much the same. And I just created all these great examples for resumes for the IST college. And then I realized I had so many formatting issues because of applicant tracking systems, and I had to redo stuff. For situations like yourself, it's really about, I think, some of the things that I talked about today with like the formatting, but it's also that customization is more important than ever. A lot of, applicant tracking systems don't get that you are in a similar, field, but going into something different. It's almost like very literal. So one thing I really encourage, and I'm a little old school with this, is I like to print out the job description and actually highlight everything that I have on the job description under responsibilities, qualifications, everything they have listed, highlighting every single thing that I have. And I did this when I applied for my current position a year ago. And then really make sure that it's literal on your resume. You are using the same keywords, especially ones that they have more than once or really emphasize. If you can put it in more than one place throughout your resume, like the objective or qualification section or summary, all kind of the same. Also put it in a skill section and, an experience, that is going to be a huge game changer. So really like going across and making sure that every single thing that you have from that job description is literally in your resume and in your cover letter is really the best way to get through those, and try to use very similar, if they ask for a, BS or BA, use BS or BA instead of spelling it out. So like little random things like that sometimes can really make a huge difference. But also taking, I know Lauren put JobScan into the chat. That is a really great resource too, to copy and paste the job description and then upload your resume, and it will show you how you match to that position. So there might just be some things like that it's just not picking it up as strongly as it is other candidates. So you're not making that like 60% level to go to that next process. Not that you're not matching, but not matching as high as other ones. And that can be a barrier as well. So that would be something that I would highly recommend. Hopefully you found that helpful. Other questions?
So just as a quick follow-up to that question, and hopefully I'll be able to phrase this correctly, but I'm in a field and where a group of fields where I advise students where there are academic forensic scientists who are applying up for academic jobs or academic type positions, as well as more traditional forensic science lab positions. So you need a resume versus a CV, and your applicant materials are obviously pretty different. And what I sort of just heard you said about, doubling up on as many of those keywords as possible to get through the screening system is sort of the opposite advice that I think I would typically give people in terms of putting things in your cover letter that are not apparent on your CV. So I just wanted to make sure that that's really the sort of advice in terms of dealing with a human versus dealing with a computer. And also, do you think that once you get through that screening system, do the people that are interviewing you, I mean, I imagine they also know that you're playing this game really to get through the computer, like in that it's not viewed as you're being redundant or being tricky in a way.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was very much in the past, was that my thing, like, don't list things more than once on a resume, but it is a shift of going in a different direction that applicant tracking systems, the way that the algorithm is working is that they do want to see, I don't want to say redundancy, but it's in the sense that it will get scored a certain level in skills, like just having it listed, but it gets scored higher when you have that skill in an experience section, because there's a longevity of your start and end date. And so it gives you that level of like your skill level is higher because you've been using this skill for, say you're in a position for 2 years versus it's just listed with no context. That's where it differs in the ranking. And yeah, like recruiters are probably aware of it, you know, but I don't think they're hyper focused on that you listed it, but then you also are showing like, this is where, you know, this is the experience where I used this certain specific skill. There was something that I heard students doing. We're trying to put text boxes in their resume and then just having white text. So when it printed, a human couldn't see it, but they had all these keywords like throughout. Applicant tracking systems, if there's no context with it, so if it's not in a specific section like skills, if it's not like an experience section, it won't read it, it will error it out, it will actually report it on the applicant. So recruiters are, you know, aware that, you know, there are some playing of the games in the system, and that's okay, as long as you're not fabricating like skills that, you know, you don't really have. But I think it's okay to emphasize, like, you're really looking for this skill and I have it, here it is, and I want to make sure it's getting noticed. But it was definitely a perspective shift for me. The more work, as I was a career counselor for 5.5 years prior to my current position and the transition. So I did have to really change my perspective on some of the advice that I was giving now that Ats Systems have really kind of changed the game. So
thank you. That's helpful.
oh, good. And yes, applicant, you know, corporate type of professional job applications versus academia is definitely a different world in itself too. And, you know, trying to help someone navigate both of those at the same time can be tricky. Other questions or comments or clarification?
If it's okay, Cassie, I would love to send your PowerPoint out to all that attended today, which I believe has your contact information as well. If no one has any other questions, I know we're ending a little early, but I think this was a lot of really great information. I really appreciate Denise and Sarah, both of your questions. I think that it was really helpful for me to hear some of those answers from Cassie as well. Janet, to answer your question, will you be receiving the recording? Yes, yeah, absolutely. I will be sending out the recording as soon as I have it along with her PowerPoint. So you guys will have those resources too. And like I said before, if you have any questions that have come up like during Cassie's presentations, you can feel free to reach out to our office as well. And Cassie just included her email in the chat. She's more than happy to help too. And we will definitely help you where we can to help you guys get your students to where they need to go. So, but thank you all for attending today. Cassie, thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to talk about this really important topic, especially as everything is shifting. So I really, really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you guys so much for having me. I hope you found it all informative and gets you thinking about your application and helping students in a new different way as we're going into another transition within the world of work in the professional world. So thank you so much. Feel free to email me with any questions, connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to answer anything or hopefully answer something or give you some good resources to learn more about this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cassie. Have a good day, everyone.